The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you may be. Sorry for the quick disruption there. My computer decided to reboot, so we had a little issue. But we are here with Kevin Bowles today. He's going to be talking about SQL provision and SQL Clone, and we are excited to have him here because this is one way that if you have big databases or whatever the case may be, and you've got a lot of remote or extended people, you should be able to actually work maybe a little bit better instead of copying these gigabyte databases around the world. I'm excited to learn it because I do have remote employees and I'm tired of copying these big databases. So Kevin and I have known each other for a little while. We're looking forward to it. So Kevin, thanks for coming by, and it's all yours. I'm gonna be on mute. If you have any questions, pop them in the question window, and I will get them to Kevin. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Glad to be here. I'm actually over in Europe this week. Going to be presenting at SQL Saturday this weekend in Utrecht, Netherlands, and just presented at Memphis last weekend. So a busy week for me. If you got any questions and you put them up, do note that I can't see what's going on with the GoToMeeting controls since I'm inside a virtual machine. So he'll just have to speak up and let me know if there's any questions so I can answer them for you. Information on me, write down the contact information if you want. You may have seen Pulp Fiction, and if you have, you know that there's a really big mess in that movie. And Winston Wolfe was the gentleman suit and tie kind of guy, strictly hands off, that came and told them how to clean up their mess. And that's kind of what I do and have done for a long time for the SQL Server Relational Engine. Unlike him, I actually do get down in the trenches and get dirty, as well as tell people how to do things better with SQL Server. I've done this Saturday will be somewhere around 112 or maybe 15 SQL Saturdays that I've done as a presenter. And a couple times a year, I may get dinged for being cocky, so I dropped world class to better than average. I still get dinged even after they see this. And if you do something for 10,000 hours, they've done studies and they've declared that to be the benchmark for making you an expert in whatever field it is. So I should be fairly good at SQL Server stuff by now. It's amazing how high and fast and wide it can scale, and how many concurrent users and size of data and whatnot that SQL Server can do. Even the standard edition is just amazing. I've had clients that would peak at over 100,000 transactions per second and worked on tens of terabytes of databases and billion row fact tables. There are much, much larger and busier systems out there. I love doing mentoring and teaching people about SQL Server. That's why I've done so many presentations at SQL Saturdays and user groups and other conferences. I am not a BI person. If you need one of those, I can introduce you to some really good people, but that is not my bailiwick. So disclaimers, I am a friend of Redgate, and I do get to use their tools for personal use, and I do engage with them to give them feedback and help them shape their product features and functionality. I get a referral fee for people or clients that say, hey, this guy told me about this cool tool you've got. Obviously, there's no impetus for anyone on here to do that. And I've had various tools vendors over the last 25 plus years try to get me to endorse their products. If I don't think their stuff is any good, I'm not going to do that, and that's the end of that story. So we'll talk about what database provisioning is and why we need that. We'll see who SQL Server Clone can benefit, and how does it actually work under the covers, get into some of the details of what's going on. It's pretty spiffy what they came up with, to be quite honest with you. We'll run through some demos and some usage scenarios, and along the way we'll be talking about data masking as well, which it's difficult trying to get a balance here between focusing on the clone product and get data masking in there, because they really do kind of go hand in hand for a lot of environments, and together they make up what is known as the SQL provisioning product line with Redgate. So back in early 2017, it may have even started before that, in late 2016, Redgate commissioned a survey to find out what was going on in the DevOps, just kind of nascent back then, world, and how people were managing large-scale production down to dev, QA, test, UAT type of environments, and found that many people do make copies, often more than one, of production databases for non-production use. A lot of them said that they really need to use that for both development and testing and troubleshooting. And obviously, a lot of times copies of production databases are used for reporting as well. Note there's a link here to down at the end of the deck that you can use to find the 2018 DevOps survey that Redgate published earlier this year. Database sizes. This is a fairly old set of data here, and I'm sure that it's much larger. And note, this is just what people were putting in their dev and test environments, and I'm sure there are large databases in many environments that are simply too unwieldy to be dropped down into lower tier environments. So DevOps is all the rage now in development. It's a manner of development in which you can speed the process of development and releasing new features. If you do it right, you can be really good at that while also reducing error rates. And that's done through good source control, good testing, good automation. And then over here where we get to release, there are various tools built around this this type of infrastructure now, some of which are Redgate, others Bamboo, Jenkins, things like that, to work the flow of data and processes along the line. And at anywhere along these areas, if you hit errors in your integration or cycle or release management, you would stop the process, send out emails, maybe take some triage or whatever, do some reporting. If everything is green, you go on and you can rapidly deploy. There are entities out there that are deploying more frequently than once a day. And it used to be people would have cycles where it was quarterly or maybe even longer before they could release new features, maybe outside of major bug fixes and things like that. Inside your production environment, we've got to do monitoring and optimization. Redgate has products for provisioning and backup, and sensitive data here now is the data masking, and obviously a lot of tools that focus on the development stack itself. So provisioning really can be a blocker to DevOps and database data security and privacy and compliance. The time that it takes to copy or backup or copy or move the large-scale databases can really be an impediment to effective use of that data for troubleshooting, for development, for bug fixes, what have you. You wind up with all kinds of copies of the same large databases and database files all over the place. They can get left over. I just had a client recently that had 2 weeks before filled up their C drive because people dropped too much stuff on the C drive and it got filled up, and they were in danger of doing the same thing in one of their test environments. Data security, we're going to talk a good bit about how we're going to secure our data, or rather make it so that the consumption of that data or the viewing of the data is not in violation of various requirements and regulations. Shared environments can get really difficult. If you have a bunch of developers working on the same database or the same set of code, the same files or whatever, one person can zig and the other zags, and then you've got a broken development stack or environment. Code builds go bad, sideways, whatever. And testing is something that unfortunately I see very few clients still really going after adequately, especially in database application type of environments. So SQL provision starts out with SQL Clone. which, as you'll see, is really fast at provisioning databases. The very low disk usage, you'll see it's like 46 or 47 megabytes, and that does not depend on the size of the clone that you might be creating. It's got PowerShell functionality, so it's very easily automatable. And then Data Masker is a very nice rules engine for allowing you to execute data obfuscation and privacy type of scripts against data that you may be exposing to unauthorized users. So disk space, you know, people say disk is cheap, and it really is, but people still run out of it. And especially in environments where you're having your stuff hosted and you pay per the month, by the month, for whatever you're using, whether it's rack space or one of the cloud vendors. You know, drive space is fairly cheap, but when you start having, you know, tens or hundreds of gigabytes of databases or backups dropped all over the place and restored, it goes away pretty quickly. Realistic data. I can't tell you the number of times I've had clients say, well, it ran fast on my development box or my laptop or my test server, and then it gets out to production and, you know, query plans are different. You got 100 million row tables instead of 1,000 row or 10,000 row tables, etc. You want to have isolated environments so that people don't step on each other's toes. You don't want some business analyst going in and doing some what if situation on some data that a developer or a QA process is about to hit, and things break simply because someone modified some data or dropped a table they thought they didn't need, etc. And in accomplishing these objectives, you wind up with multiples of your production data set if you're using it, and if you don't, well, then you're not getting all the benefits of actually using production data. Some companies got a couple developers and that's it. Others have, you know, offices worth of development teams with multiple developers per team. You've got multiple branches of code, whether it's the main branch, 2.4, 2.5. You got hot fixes coming in on each of those, and then new development they're working on 3.0. And each of those, again, if you try to do that development within the same data set, you're probably not going to have a very happy picture. And then again, testing, QA, and source control are just fundamentally critical for success in shifting things left, meaning moving the development cycle and testing cycle closer to the developers and speeding up that release cycle. So that's a big stack of papers there, and boy, are there a lot of rules out there. Healthcare's had the HIPAA stuff for, I don't know, going on 2 decades now, maybe. We've got banking and PCI and Sarbanes-Oxley, and insurance has their stuff. We just had the California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018 was signed into law, I think just this month. We've got GDPR is out now. You had till May, I think it was, and now it's wide open, and there's a whole lot of requirements in there. And then just the cost of data breaches. If you accidentally expose data, which, believe it or not, happens routinely to an unprotected server, if you have obfuscated that data, the cost of that breach could be significantly mitigated because you're no longer releasing actual customer data or healthcare data, personally identifying information, things like that. It really is a pet peeve of mine to see production databases have databases with _test or _dev or some date, whatever on them. And I've had more than one client where I've said, hey, you just get rid of that junk off of your production box and you won't need to buy a new server or upsize your cloud VM or what have you. It's really, really important to keep just production data on your production servers. But if you need to move that over to another environment, it is going to take perhaps a very long time. Just a note here, since I'm a performance fanatic, you really do need to have instant file initialization enabled everywhere that you're going to be restoring large sets of data. Because if you don't, then when you do a restore, that's a creation of a file chunk, and SQL Server under the covers will say, hey, Windows, I need a secure file chunk that I'm going to drop this restored database into. And you may wait sometimes hours for some terabytes worth of disk space to be zeroed out. Meanwhile, you're crushing the writes on that IO subsystem before the restore even starts. And then you may take another hour or 2 or 5 or more to actually lay the data down into the space that was just zeroed out. So please do make a note of that, and make sure your environments have that enabled, unless you're a place that's hyper secure and needs to have every bit zeroed out before you drop a SQL Server file chunk on top of it. So again, the sensitive data, realistic data, production data has its own data value skew, and you're going to get different query plans based on what that skew is, but using it can be against regulations or the law, and you do want to be cognizant of that. So who is it that's going to be doing database provisioning? Depending on your environment, you may or may not have an admin. You may have a team of them. You might have some manager who used to be the DBA who's now in charge of multiple people or different environmental stuff like network and Windows and telecom, etc. It could be even larger up the food chain in large environments, and they would delegate it back down to a group perhaps. And sometimes, like many of my clients, you just got a developer, you sat together and you drew the straw, and whoever had the short one wound up being the everything accidental DBA, as it were. So developers can obviously use production realistic data because they're going to see what it really looks like, and then when they run their queries, which hopefully they do before they say, here, let's check this code in, they can see maybe what kind of query plan it's going to get, and look for performance issues before that moves out the door. Testers in QA for some of the same reasons. Reporting, obviously, if you have reporting teams then or reporting group, you probably are not going to want to obfuscate your data, although sometimes you may have to, because you want your reports to reflect the actual production data. And you can indeed use SQL Clone for reporting environments without having to restore that 10 terabyte data warehouse to do some reporting off of. And obviously, performance troubleshooting, can't say this enough, that you just don't see the same query plans due to data value skew, size of data, number of rows, the depth of indexes and B trees and things like that. You just can't tune small data or non-production size data, whatever that is in your realm. So SQL Clone is it's an engine, if you will, that lets you just really put together very fast editable copies of a database, and it does really only take seconds on regardless of the size of the database, and the disk space, as you'll see when we get to our demos, is exceptionally low on the local host that you're mounting the database to. Technical details and architecture. Give me a moment here. So, bit of a busy screen here, but we'll go through it piece by piece. SQL Clone has a couple of services. There's one that provides a little mini web server that can be used for administering the engine itself. And there's agents that can be installed on database servers that will provide data for creation of images, or which mount databases as clones from those images. Note, PowerShell is an input to the SQL Clone engine. This can, in fact, be stored or run on a test or a dev or a QA box. It doesn't, the main actual application can be wherever you would like it to be as far as its SQL Server database and the engine service goes. You can, in fact, create live copies. It uses the volume snapshot service under the covers of a running live database. And that's going to be essentially like doing a backup, if you will. Uses the same kind of technology under the covers. You can also, it's not shown here, you can run image creation directly from backups, including a full with a diff that would be associated with that full as its baseline. You create a database file on a file share that servers have access to, and their agent says, hey, SQL Clone, I want to build a clone of that image, web orders 16.11.04, and it will, under the covers, do the virtual file disk stuff that's necessary, as we'll see, and attach the database up to their that particular SQL server. Any questions on this before I move on? Okay, and we can always go back if a question comes up and we need to move back there.
Yeah, we're clear on questions right now.
Yeah. Okay. So here you can see that you can have obviously multiple clones on the same web server, cloned databases. An image can have multiple clones that reside on different database servers, and different images can mount their own separate clones on the same database server as well. It really is just a matter of file naming and folder naming and database naming, so that you don't have, you know, obvious conflicts on those things. And these are the image files, again, that are created under the covers by the SQL Clone image creation process that we saw earlier. Okay, volume shadow copy service, been around for a long time. It's really an underpinning in Windows. A lot of different technologies actually make use of this. You can back up or copy a file or disk at a point in time while that file or disk is in use, and you can pull all the pieces parts out of that point in time snapshot of the state of that data at that moment, just by accessing various file pointers within the volume shadow copy service, VSS. SQL Server Snapshots use this technology. Virtualization can use this technology. Backup products can use this. And in fact, in environments that have some different types of backup technologies in play, you can go into the SQL Server error log and watch error log entries or see them that say, you know, I/O was frozen for some short period of time, and those messages actually indicate a volume shadow copy snapshot was actually taken, most likely for a backup purpose. So virtual disk service actually is one of the underpinnings of virtualization systems, and within Windows, you can use it without actually, quote, having, you know, virtualized, you know, Hyper-V or VMware. You can mount those actual disks as remote storage while having a local copy, if you will, that knows that the data is really not here. It's over there across the network, but I'm going to present under the covers to the Windows storage system this stuff that says I really am this MDF or this LDF or these NDFs that actually exist in an image file over on another server somewhere. And you mount them as read-only with a difference disk, which, as we'll see in our demo, will actually grow when you do data modification, because the original image that's taken on the file share is immutable. It can't be modified. That all takes place on the local server at with the local copy of the data. So, and then that's a way it's virtual hard drive chaining is what, you know, allows that technology to work with some disks over there and real disks that got modified data actually as a local copy. But SQL Server doesn't know or care what's going on under the covers, because all it does is it says, hey, Windows, I need this data because it's not in memory. And Windows says, okay, I know what's going on there. Some of it's here local now because it's been modified, and some of it's over there on that file share, and I'm going to take care of it and get it to you. And it's actually pretty spiffy, the way that it works. So we say to create an image off of a live server, we start out by mounting a local share, and this would be on the file share that we're going to make the image copy of. And we mount that up and point it back to a snapshot on the actual SQL server which gets us a point-in-time copy of say, a 50 gigabyte database. And then we use that volume shadow copy service to copy all the blocks in the original pristine state at the moment that snapshot was created over to the VHD, and we consume it and grow it up to whatever size the MDF, LDF, et cetera are. And then when that's done, we simply unmount that VHD, and it is ready now to be copied and accessed from a clone that may have a file pointer set up to that. And as we go through our demos, you'll actually see this technology. I'll be showing you in the Windows file system. You can actually watch stuff happen in real time, which is pretty cool. So Data Masker, we'll switch over to that. It's a rules engine that is necessarily complex. If you think about all of the possible types of data all around the world with different requirements for what they might need to look like or not look like to represent, quote, real world data distribution, it is necessarily complex. But it has sets of data that you can go through. It's got pre-built functions that you can make access of with just point and click, drag and drop type of stuff to execute a suite of queries against database tables to modify the data to obfuscate or protect it or keep it from being exposed to non-authorized individuals. Lots of built-in functionality and options. And again, we'll go through a little dog and pony show here in a moment. They are working on the next major release of this, and there are some numerous feature and usage enhancements coming out from the people that have used the product up to this point. And it is a fairly new product in Redgate's suite of SQL Server products, going a long time back to their source code control and SQL prompt and things like that. And now we'll switch over here to pull it up. And this is a rule set that I've already opened up that modifies some data in my copy of AdventureWorks 2008 R2. Note that trigger management is something that can be very important, because if you have triggers on a table and then you go doing lots of data modifications on the data in those tables, the triggers can fire and do all kinds of unwanted potentially things. So you have the ability to turn those off. You can control foreign keys. You can disable those, which is desirable in a lot of cases when you're doing data obfuscation, so that A, you don't waste the effort looking things up to make sure that there's matches when it doesn't really matter necessarily. Also, that you don't get foreign key violations when you're trying to obfuscate the data, because you're creating things that may not exist in child tables yet, or parent tables rather. So double-clicking a rule brings it up, and you can see here this is a last name. Its data type is an invarchar 50, and I have said to just use surnames with a random short list, and there are quite a few. If you look here of different things that you can do, just look at the choices of dates, credit card numbers, email type modifications, Medicare numbers for Australia, all kinds of name type things with different languages, right, which should represent more national level data distributions for first and especially last names. Lots and lots and lots of built-in things here. Nullability, integer type information, floating point, how do you want it laid out? Again, just lots and lots of things, addresses, tables, TCP, telephone numbers and different nationalities. So lots and lots and lots of choices here. You can set predicates, you can sample the rows, you respond to different error things. Like if you get foreign key, you can list out errors and say, I'm just going to ignore that, and it'll just roll right by. So really a lot of information here that you can do. Again, substitutions are kind of the bread and butter, if you will, of what we do with data masking. But there's a lot of other things you can do, including cross database. You can go over to another server with a query to pull dictionary or lookup type data, data synchronization, a lot of things that you can do here. And as you save this out, you can run it to see what it does to your data as a test. You can also, though, save the set, and that's what I've done, and I'll show you how we can use this to integrate it within our clone image creation or our clone creation process to protect data from unauthorized viewing. Any questions on the Data Masker product? I know that's a pretty quick review there. Just want to give you enough to wet your whistle and get you interested in it, and you can go and get a download for a evaluation copy and play around with it yourself and see if it suits a need that you might have.
No questions yet, Kevin.
Moving on. Demos. Woot! This is what we're all here for, right? So we're going to go over to the website, and let's see here. Let's do a, I'm going to see if I can drop this, if I have any, let's see here. Yep. All right. So we have a clean set now. I'm going to refresh my database list. And so you can see I've got my AdventureWorks 2008 R2 and no other copies of that at the moment. We'll pull up our, this is our root folder where I'm going to be sharing out the, creating the data. And you can see I've got a file for images and a file for clones. And the first thing we'll be doing is creating an image. So I'll start in that folder right there. And I'm going to create an image with a live data source. And you can see backups or data source, either one. And I've already used this instance, so the drop down is there for me. We'll call it AdventureWorks 2008 R2. And here's where do I want to modify it. Now this is one type of modification that I can do, and that is to take the image, get the data, mount it as a database, run these scripts, and it might be something like drop some tables. It could be run a data masking script. There's various things that we can do here that we would want to do while we're creating the image that might help us with what we're going to do with it later. So I'll go out and get my drop table for image build script, and we'll see that some databases, some tables get dropped. And I'll go up and find my data masking set, and we'll do person masking. So now I've got two different things that are going to be processed on that data before the image is actually created. And you can mount it local. If I do that, I'm going to get a warning that says, hey, if you don't mount it on a whack file share location, then only local things can access it. So I'll go ahead and change that. Oh, excuse me, got tripped out there. So let's get this guy in place, and we'll say OK. And give it a name. And we'll have a useful name there. And so now it's going through and doing all of the stuff. And we'll pop over to our images directory, and you can see we already have a folder created. And it is not, in fact, 2 terabytes in size. Just want to let you know that. That's kind of a, can be a scary thing to see there. Let's see if I can catch it. You can see here is SQL Clone temp with a funky name. This is the database that's already extracted it out. It's mounted up that VHD as an actual database, and it's currently running the data modification stuff that came in the masking set and the drop tables script that I have, which should be AW build version, error log, database log, and production transaction history archive. So once it's done, we should see that those tables are dropped, and some, I'll show you some, and it's completed here. So we now have a modified, you can see data copy, if you will, that we can then make a clone of. And let's go over to our file structure again. And we can see that that's it. It's a virtual hard disk, and its current size is 336 megabytes in size, and that is what houses AdventureWorks. So now we'll go and let's make a copy of that. Excuse me, a clone of that, and we can click this, and we can make a template here, and we can see what those are. It's always got you ready to say, hey, what am I supposed to do with this thing? So I'm going to go back actually and make a template first. So we'll drop some more tables, and we'll go back to our SQL Clone folder. Hopefully that's this one. Drop tables for SQL Clone build, and we'll create ourselves a template. So now you can have multiple of these, and now when I say do a clone, I've got a list here. I can choose this template to modify the data as it's being mounted up as a database. So I'm going to put it on the same server. I'm going to call it So now we'll pop back over while that's going, and you can see already we have a directory structure here with its naming scheme. And again, shows as a 2 terabyte dry disk. It's really not. You can see the little arrow here. It's a pointer, if you will, mount point that points back to actually this VHD here. And we'll dig into that, and you'll see that's it. It's 47 megabytes, and it doesn't matter what size database you restore. It's going to be 47 megabytes. That's just the overhead of the technology, and that's it. So we see some information here about its creation. We can see what was done to it, so we go and find out what the state of it is. We've got options. We can reset it. Very fast operation. Just chops off all the users from the current copy of that database and redoes the clone creation, and it's ready for a rerun or perhaps more testing or another run of a build or what have you. Click a button, you can drop, and that's pretty much that technology there. Let's refresh our database list, and hopefully we'll have a database here, and we do. And we can see that those AW and error tables and things are dropped down here. Production transaction history archive is gone. If I look at person.person here, I can see that this is not the actual person.person first and last names. These are the ones that were put in there as replacements with my masking script. And I can go and take a look at the email address, which I also did some obfuscation on. And you can see that clearly these are, dummy email addresses, but they do have some pattern to, the domain names and things like that. So somewhat realistic there. And that is what's going on with the clone. Now let's dig into that folder, and you can see right on down under the covers, that's what it looks like. You're able to see there's the MDF and the LDF, which is actually over here inside this guy that was created under the covers by a volume shadowed copy service of a live database mounted as a virtual hard disk that we then made a mount point to and put a differencing disk on, which is this guy, and said, hey, SQL Server, here's database files. Let's attach this guy. And there you go. And that's the foundation of what SQL Clone is and what it's doing. So now we're going to do some PowerShell stuff here. A lot of DevOps is we like to be automated because we want to move fast, and we can't really move fast if human beings have to be awake and or doing things, responding, and they've got some appointment that day or some other priority came up, some fire to put out. So here we can do get help star clone star, and we can see that there's quite a list of commandlets that are available for you. And there's a full reference here. Just click and navigate down. There's some samples that are fully worked up for you to do a number of things, including running masking and things like that. We'll create an image. Here we get the clone server, which is our local with a specific port number. Here's the machine name, and the instance name is empty. That's the default. Here's where we're going to store it. And we're going to create a new image with the AdventureWorks name and a date time stamp as the image name on our instance that we've defined with this database name and the image destination we've defined, and go ahead and run it. And again, this time we'll watch to see how long this takes. And this is doing it again from a live database. Again, you can the commandlet will accept various inputs and settings, parameters, but rather for using a full and/or its associated diff backup to create. So there you see we're done. So really doesn't take very long. Again, this is a local, pretty fast SSD inside a VM, and we've now got over here our second clone file. And I'm going to grab my date timestamp here so I can use it in additional PowerShell scripts. Normally we would just have that all scripted out, but I'm pretty simple. So we'll put that here, and we'll put it here. And with this, it's going to connect up to the instance, and it's going to create 5 database clones, one right after the other, with an appending of the number after the date timestamp. And when I kick this off, we'll see that it's pretty quick. And you can see I'm creating my clone folders here, right? They're just rolling down, and I can go over here and see, refresh my database list. And I've got 2, 3, there's my 4th one, and there's my 5th one. So just in a matter of seconds, let's see, I think this script actually gives us, so in 17 seconds, I created 5 copies of AdventureWorks and mounted them on this database server. And they are fully, their SQL Server has no idea, right? It's all the stuff is there, and anything you do happens just like it were a local, real, actual physical disk file, which again, to me, is pretty darn cool. So now let's take a look at what we can do with some of the data. I'm going to go into, let's use this guy. And AdventureWorks, you can see this is how big it is, and we're going to note that it's 47 megabytes. Each one of them are the same, right? And let's go to our 0 file. There it is, all the same. And I'm going to get to the right database here, which is, let's see here, 10, 10, 12 through 503, this guy. And I'm going to get into that. And I'm actually just going to make a copy of the person table, which is about 30 megabytes in size. And it's done, right? And I can see that it's an actual table now without the DBO. That's the table. There it is, 30. It's the same as the person.person was. And this is one of the keys about SQL Clone. When you modify data, it's represented on the local disk that's mounted, the differencing disk. So if you're doing massive data writes or data modifications on your clone copy, it's gonna use your local disk, and if that's fast SSD, great. If it's a 3 disk RAID 5 7200 RPM SATA disks, it may not go very well for you from a performance standpoint. That's not the technology's fault. It's just a matter of how it has to pull the data over to the local server, modify it, and since the actual copy of the data, which remember is down in here, is inviolate, it can't be modified. Any data changes will sit up here in the differencing disk. Excuse me, I need to be here. And you can see it's larger because we did some data modifications. So let's now clean up after ourselves here. And this script will simply iterate through those 5 databases and drop them off from the server. So there goes 3 and 2 and 1, and we'll go over here and look, and our clones folder is cleaned up, and all of them are gone. Script hopefully completed successfully. So can I find, must have had a name there. So it looked like it got rid of them. Not sure what the error was. So questions on the functionality. Moved pretty quick there, but that's really the basic fundamentals of it, as how and why it works.
One question that I would have would be is latency, that if you have say your clone server in your image server basically in one location, and then your clones are in another location, how's latency between those?
Well, it depends on how the latency is between your 2 places. If it's 1 megabit DSL line, it's not going to be pretty. There's just no 2 ways around that, because if you've got a terabyte size database and you're hitting a 100 million row table, and for some reason your query is scanning it, when you say something like that, well, it's got to bring all that data from over there, wherever over there is, to this local instance of SQL Server. And that is a matter of how fat the pipe is and what the latency is on each packet that's going to be coming through that pipe. So in a situation where you've got, as you mentioned, remote users that are needing local copies of data, if it's large databases and they don't have good network speed, it may not be the right solution for that particular need. Okay, because you do need to bring the data to where the SQL Server has the clone database. Even though under the covers, again, it's pointing over to this thing, which might be in the Chicago office, and here we are down in Miami, and whatever that bandwidth is between that is what we're going to have to deal with data movement.
Okay.
So again, realistic data. We do what we need with our cleaning. We can do it before we create the image. We can do it as we create the clone. Either way, and and again, you can do data protection in here as well. And again, you're not troubleshooting on production. If you got to go find out why some query went wonky, then you don't necessarily want to be troubleshooting sometimes in production. Although, let's be honest here, sometimes you actually do need to do that. That's fine. Drive space. You can see it was 300 some meg, and it was a 47 meg file. I encourage you to go download a sample, a trial copy of SQL Clone, and do it on your terabyte size data warehouse and see what the size of that disk that gets created is. You'll see that the technology is independent of what's it's pointing to over yonder, to use my southern colloquialism. And again, it's differential storage. You only would consume local drive space if you modify data, which is good for reporting. You typically don't modify data. A lot of troubleshooting type stuff is mostly select, look what's the query plan, things like that. And even test suites, often you try to modify as little data as is necessary in your test suites, simply so that you can pack the same amount of tests in a shorter period of time as possible to, again, speed up your development and release and testing cycles. Avoiding shared environments. Can't count the number of times I've had clients just mess up their development process or even mess up my development process because somebody stepped on somebody else's toes with data that needed to be in a certain state for a script or what have you. There's just so many ways that things can go sideways when you've got a bunch of different people doing a bunch of different things on the same set of data. And again, you can have multiple clones per image. You saw how fast it was to spin up 5 copies of that image, and you can spread them out over whatever environments that you need. Creating the clones really is fast. Again, data, we can't let people see data that they're not authorized to have access to. And the penalties for doing that with HIPAA and GDPR especially are very significant. And this is really something that a lot more people are stepping up and taking notice of these days. Okay. So here's a good thing that I've had the clients make use of is A/B testing. You've got 2 branches of code or 2 sets of analytics that you want to run. You just mount 2 clones, run A on one, B on the other, and you do comparative analytics between what the state of the data is between A and B. And that comparative analytics can be a really beneficial process to put in play for things like financials, healthcare, bio, pharma, things like that. So it really is fast. Even with instant file initialization on, restoring a couple of terabyte database is just gonna take time. It really is. They're really small. You can automate this. There's more to the product here as far as functionality. They're creating a new dashboard that has more functionality than we have with our current system. More information is going to be exposed and ways that you can view and get at things. Activity log to see what's there. It's got role-based permissions, things like that. And self-service is really key, right? If you can protect it so that people can't restore things that they're not allowed to restore, but if a developer needs to make a refresh, they just go to the website, click it, or run a PowerShell script, and poof, they're off and running with a new copy of the database. So features, we'll try to wrap up quick here. Central management server, image from LiveDB, we saw that. You can do from backups, including a full diff pair. Image from clone, full size. They are researching the potential for maybe doing chained clones, where you make a clone and then you do some modifications to it, and then your clone becomes just the small part that has been modified, and doing some kind of daisy chaining like that. Nothing out official on that yet. There's some other features that they're also considering, and automation with PowerShell. Templates for repeatable actions, and note you can have multiple templates. So developer A might get template 1, and the business analyst might get template 2. Ability to run data master actions as well as scripts. One thing that might be common there is the SP change users login, where you take a database from one server and mount it to another one that has different SIDs for the same logins. You need to run that script to sync up the login so that your permissions and stuff work inside the database on the SQL Server. Activity logging, 64 terabytes clone, that's a pretty big size database. Not unlimited though, so if you're massive scale, this may not be able to do what you're looking for it to do. Again, limitations already brought up with the question is the speed of movement over the network. A good thing there is if you've got like a virtual machine or host or a set of hosts and they're on a shared backplane or with shared storage or all attached to the same SAN, that obviously that's going to be not an issue. Cross database or excuse me, something across data server environment, then you might be a little slower, but really slow remote type storage or user could really be a problem there. So you want to give people production size protected data, automate it, or provide it as self-service and start getting your DevOps picture sped up significantly. So that's going to wrap it up for the examples. You can see here what Data Masker is really for. People inside, the covers, if you will, get to see all of the data. Reporters maybe, and then out here, people under HIPAA, for example, developers are not allowed to see unmasked or non-protected or obfuscated healthcare PHI data. A number of links here, the PowerShell work examples, commandlet reference, there's a quick start guide. If you want the 2018 DevOps report, a lot of good stuff in there about things that are happening and what other people are doing, what tools are out there, things like that. Are there any questions as we wrap up here?
I don't see any out there yet. We'll give them a second here, Kevin. I appreciate you presenting this to the group. Very informative. For those that would like to look at it again, we'll post it up on YouTube for the Virtualization Virtual Chapter group. We'll post it up there so people can see it. Of course, if you have any questions and you're forgetting any Kevin's information, just email me and I'll forward it on to him.
Email down here, the SQLguru@gmail.com, at the SQL Guru, and if you're on Twitter, don't forget about the SQL Help hashtag as well.
All right, nobody's coming in, so once again,
thank you.
Thanks for presenting this.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.